A mail-order contract brought her to the wrong ranch, and the cowboy swore she'd never face danger alone. Before we begin, take a moment to drop a comment with your city. Where are you listening from tonight? And when the story's over, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10 now. Settle in and enjoy the ride. Montana Territory, summer of 1880. The late afternoon sun burned gold across the prairie, and dust curled around wagon wheels like thin smoke. In front of a deserted ranch gate, a lone wagon stood still, its chest lid half open. Beside it, a stranger, a woman, her gloved hands clutching a letter that trembled in the wind. No one came to meet her, no chimney smoke, no hoofbeats, only a silence that stretched too far. Lawson Reed reined in his horse, eyes narrowing against the light. He read the lines on that letter quickly. Cold, cutting words that left no welcome. Folding it, he slipped it into his pocket. "You won't be sleeping out here," he said, his voice firm, carrying no trace of doubt. And just like that, with one sentence, one hand extended, the edge of despair began to break. The Montana evening lay warm and heavy over the land. The last light of day drifted across brittle grass, and the road dust hung in the air as if it didn't want to settle. Lawson drove the stranger toward his own ranch, a modest white house tucked under the shade of an old cottonwood, with a red horse barn out back and a garden freshly turned. He opened the door, letting her step in first. "First room down the hall has a lock. I'll be sleeping in the barn." Genevieve turned, her eyes a mix of doubt and exhaustion. "You don't have to do that." Lawson only shook his head. "I do." No promises, no embrace, just a quiet distance kept so she would know she was safe. If you've ever met a stranger who somehow made you feel safer than people you've known for years, drop the words, "I understand," in the comments. Part 1. The Cautious Days. Dawn on the Montana prairie never came in a rush. The first light slipped in like a ribbon of pale gold, sliding through the crack in the door and spilling softly across the wooden porch. The world was so still, you could hear the horses snort in the barn, and the old hinges sigh as the door eased open. Lawson stepped out first, dark shirt, boots still dusted from yesterday. In his hands, 2 enamel cups sent thin curls of coffee steam drifting into the cool morning air. Genevieve was already there, sitting on the bottom step, her gray dress drawn neatly around her knees, shadows of a sleepless night still under her eyes. He handed her the cup. Her fingers brushed his before pulling back. "Thank you," she said, her voice low and husky, as if she had to swallow a dozen questions before speaking. They sat in silence, watching the sun climb the rim of the horizon. Neither spoke of yesterday, of the letter left on the wagon seat, or the man who had abandoned her. Only the wind through the cottonwood and the deep, warm scent of coffee filled the space between them. Lawson broke the quiet, his voice steady. "How long do you plan on staying in Montana?" Genevieve took a small sip, holding the cup like it was the one thing left she could trust. "I plan on surviving first, then I'll decide." He nodded, without a smile. "If you want work, I've got a garden that needs tending. I'll pay you." She frowned slightly. "You've given me a room and a meal. I don't want to be a burden." "You've never been a burden," he said slowly, as if carving each word into the ground beneath them. "And I don't give handouts. You work, you eat." In the widening morning light, for the first time, she saw his eyes as more than those of a stranger. They belonged to a man who understood the worth of living by one's own hands. By noon, the sun hung high in a pale sky, pouring down on the garden behind the house like salt scattered across the earth. Lawson handed her a hoe, its wooden handle worn smooth from years of use. "Soil's tougher than I remember," he said, pointing to neat rows of carrots and onions. "Pull the weeds, but keep the roots." Don't yank too hard, or you'll lose the moisture. Genevieve studied the tidy rows, wild green tucked between them. She wasn't used to this kind of work, but she didn't ask questions. Rolling her sleeves up, she revealed skin browned by travel. They worked side by side. The sound of hoe striking dirt, weeds tearing loose, and the distant chatter of hens filled the air. Every so often, Lawson glanced over, watching her wipe sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, her movements brisk, unpretending. "In Chicago," she said suddenly, "I worked in a warehouse near the river. Spent all day sorting crates. My hands ached, but my mind had more space than it does now." He leaned on the hoe, looking at her. "You miss that life." A faint smile touched her lips. "I miss the certainty. Every morning, I knew which window the sun would hit first. Here, the sky's too big. Feels like it could swallow you any time." Lawson crouched, scooping up a handful of dirt, letting it run through his fingers. "It will swallow you if you let it. But if you put the work in, it'll remember you longer." She didn't answer, but her grip on the hoe tightened. Their shadows stretched long across the earth. A man and a woman who didn't yet understand each other, but were both learning to take root here. Evening settled slow, painting the barn roof red and stretching the cottonwood shadow all the way to the far fence. Genevieve washed her hands at the pump, the cold water carrying away the dirt and some of the day's fatigue. Inside, Lawson stood by the stove, stirring a pot of beans. A fresh loaf of bread rested on a clean cloth. Without looking up, he said, "Sit, eat." She took a seat, her eyes drifting around the kitchen orderly. Nothing wasted, nothing missing. The firelight warmed the room, a far cry from the cold edge of the road. They ate in quiet, broken only by the soft scrape of knives on plates and the groan of chair legs. She noticed how he slid the soft center of the bread toward her, keeping the crust for himself. Midway through, he spoke, "You worked well today. Not everyone makes it through the first half day." She smiled faintly. "I'm not used to quitting, and I've got nowhere to go back to." He met her eyes, not probing, just storing the truth away. "Then here, we can start from anywhere." It wasn't a promise, but it tightened something in her chest, like hearing words she hadn't known she'd been waiting for. After the meal, Lawson carried the dishes to the sink. Genevieve rose to help, but he shook his head. "Tomorrow's another long day. Rest while you can." She went to her room, shut the door, and for the first time, the wind outside didn't feel quite so cold. Morning came with silver drops of dew along the fence line. Genevieve stepped out onto the porch, her hair tied back neater than yesterday. The wariness in her gaze softened. Lawson was already there, the coffee pot beside him, steam curling upward. He poured 2 cups. "Drink it hot. Mornings here. Bite colder than they look." She wrapped her hands around the cup, the heat seeping through the thin gloves. They sat quietly, watching sunlight creep over the hills. "How long have you lived alone?" she asked. He sipped his coffee before answering. "Since I lost my family. This land, this house, it's all from my own hands." A pause. "Then, living alone's not hard. Finding a reason to open the door every morning, that's the hard part." She looked down into her cup, tracing the rim with her finger. "I used to think marrying someone, even without love, was reason enough. But yesterday, I realized I don't need a reason. Borrowed from someone else." He tilted his head. "So what do you need now?" Her gaze met his, clear and unflinching. "Work, shelter, and not to be pitied." Lawson nodded once. "Then we start with work." And in that moment, with coffee in their hands and the day warming, a thin strand of trust stretched between them, fragile, but strong enough to hold against a Montana wind. That afternoon, the sun poured honey gold over the barn roof and fresh-turned earth. Lawson set 2 baskets of seed down by the carrot rows. If we plant today, you'll see sprouts next week, he said, his tone carrying a hint of something like a small promise. Genevieve knelt, her gray dress tucked neatly, planting each seed with care, as if it were a piece of a new life. Lawson worked beside her in his steady, unhurried way. "You always work like this?" she asked. "Always. The land needs to know you'll be back tomorrow. Leave it too long, and it forgets you." She was quiet for a beat. "Maybe people are the same. Leave them too long, and they forget you." Lawson glanced over. "I don't forget anyone who's walked into my home." The words fell softly, like dust on the wind, but landed deep in her right, where old wounds still lived. When the last row was planted, he stood, offered her a hand. His calloused grip held just long enough to steady her before letting go. No more was said, but they both knew they'd planted more than seeds in that soil today. That night, they sat on the porch again, coffee traded for weak tea. The garden lay dark before them, but in the quiet, something unseen had already begun to grow. Part 2. Connection through the work. Early July. Sunlight slanted across the rolling hills, laying silver over the garden rows, until the onion tops and carrot greens seemed dusted with frost. By now, Lawson and Genevieve had fallen into a rhythm. Words were scarce, yet nothing was left undone. He dug the furrows. She dropped the seeds. He hauled the water. She pulled the weeds. The sound of the hoe in the soil, the splash of water spilling down the rows. These blended with the low sigh of the wind. At times, they worked so close, their hands almost brushed, but neither stepped back. The nearness felt natural. Genevieve had learned to read the slight glance Lawson gave when he needed a different tool. Lawson knew she'd leave the hoe or shears exactly where he liked to find them. No declarations, no grand gestures, just a steady thread, spun a little tighter each day around both their hearts. When the sun dipped low, they stacked the tools neatly and pulled a faded tarp over them. Before leaving the garden, Lawson bent to pluck a single wild daisy that had wandered into the carrot row. He placed it in her palm. "For the kitchen table," he said, "to brighten the place." She only nodded. But later, back at the house, she set that daisy in the only glass jar she owned, right in the middle of the wooden table. The Montana midday heat made the ranch yard shimmer. The barn smelled of dry timber and hay, earthy, but comforting. Lawson was brushing the mane of a new gray gelding, each stroke slow and sure. Genevieve stepped to the open doorway, a bucket of cold water in her hands, droplets sliding down the metal and darkening her dress. "You said you needed help," she asked. "Hold his head steady." Lawson replied, without looking up. She walked to the gelding's side, laying a hand on its neck. The animal flinched at first, but she didn't pull away, murmuring something so soft Lawson couldn't catch it. He glanced over, surprise flickering in his eyes. "You know how to settle him." "My father kept 2 draft horses for the freight wagon," she said, her palm moving in calm, slow strokes. "They just need to know you're not in a hurry." They worked like that for a long while, the scrape of brush on hair, the trickle of water into the trough. Sweat ran down Lawson's temple. Without a word, Genevieve slid the bucket closer to him. When the work was done, Lawson set the brush aside and wiped his brow with his sleeve. "Thanks," he said. She shrugged. "Just work." But they both knew some tasks were more than work. They were ways of learning each other, piece by piece. That evening, clouds crawled in from the west, pulling the light out of the sky sooner than usual. Wind brought the damp scent of grass. Inside the cabin, a lamp cast its warm glow over the walls, throwing their shadows tall and quiet. Lawson sat near the hearth, boots lined up neatly beside him. Genevieve held a thin, time-worn book. "Found this on your shelf," she said. Want me to read? He only nodded. Her voice was low from a day's labor, a little husky, but each word landed solid, like raindrops on a tin roof. Outside, the wind pressed at the windows, but inside, there was only the turning of pages and the steady sound of his breathing. From time to time, Lawson closed his eyes, not from sleep, but to listen better. As if storing her voice away, she read about faraway coasts and voyages neither of them had seen. When she paused to sip water, he said quietly, "You read like you've been there." A faint smile curved her lips. "Maybe I want to believe I have." They didn't speak much after that. When she finished, Genevieve closed the book and set it back in its place. Lawson stayed in his chair, watching the fire sink low. She eased into the seat across from him. The quiet between them was too comfortable to disturb. Later, heavy clouds brought the first scattered drops of rain. Genevieve was taking laundry from the line when Lawson came from the barn, a canvas coat on and a metal pail in his hand. "Let me," he said, stepping in to unclip the damp pins. They stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the porch roof as the rain fell hard into the yard, splashing mud against the steps. "Back in Chicago," she murmured. Rain never smelled like anything but coal smoke. Lawson watched the gray sky, the water running down his coat sleeves. "Here, it smells like earth, like the thing that keeps you alive." They stood there, listening to the heavy drops on the garden rows, to the cattle shifting in the barn. Neither was in a rush to go inside. After a moment, Lawson stretched a hand out into the rain, then held it up for her to see. "Colder than well water," he said with the barest hint of a smile. She set the laundry down and did the same. The chill bit into her skin, but it felt clean in a way she couldn't name. Pulling her hand back, she found him already watching her, his gaze quiet but deep as the earth drinking in the rain. That night, the storm was gone, leaving only the drip of water from the eaves into the barrel by the kitchen. The fire in the hearth burned steady, mingling with the fresh scent of mint tea she had brewed. Lawson crouched by the flames, pushing embers together with the poker. The glow lit the calluses on his hands. Genevieve set a cup of tea on the table and sat down opposite him. "Tomorrow, I'd like to try saddling the horse myself," she said, testing the words. He looked up, the corner of his mouth lifting. "All right, but I'll stand close, just in case you need catching." She smiled faintly, but didn't answer. The firelight flickered in her eyes, giving them more warmth than usual. Lawson leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers together. "You don't have to prove anything to me," he said, voice low and certain. "Just do what makes you feel like you belong here." She knew it wasn't only about the work, and in the quiet that followed, she felt the truth of it. He'd be there tomorrow, and the day after. They stayed that way until the fire sank to glowing coals. No goodnights were spoken. Each went to their room, carrying the same thing, the warmth that had been left between these four walls. Part 3. The Dancing Moment. July 14th. The wind came down off the hills, carrying the scent of dry grass and a hint of heat that promised no rain. All day, Lawson and Genevieve had worked side by side, stacking fresh-cut firewood, wiping the dust from the windows, checking the south fence for loose rails. By the time the sun slipped behind the mountains, the sky burned deep orange. Lawson disappeared into the house without a word. Genevieve was washing her hands at the pump when she heard a soft clatter of wood, followed by a sound that stopped her cold, a slow, mournful thread of fiddle music. She turned. There he was, sitting on the porch rail, the fiddle tucked under his chin, fingers pressing the strings, bow, drawing a tune into the evening air. It wasn't the lively kind she'd heard at church socials. It was older, slower, carrying the weight of miles traveled and years gone. Genevieve leaned against the porch post, arms folded. You never said you played. You never asked. His eyes stayed on the strings. The tune softened, winding like a breeze through spring grass. Something in her chest eased. The long days of work, the quiet watchfulness, they loosened their grip in the warmth of that sound. When the last note faded, Lawson looked up, the faintest smile in his eyes. You ever danced? Once, at a church hall, but I've forgotten most of it. Then, he said, standing and still holding the fiddle in one hand. We'll remember. She blinked. Here, no lights, no music, but you got the music. As for light, he glanced toward the oil lamp glowing in the window. Enough to keep from stepping on each other's toes. A short laugh escaped her unforced. For the first time since she'd come to Montana, and for reasons she couldn't name, she found herself moving toward him. Lawson set the fiddle against the porch post and stepped in front of her. He held out a calloused hand, not insisting, just waiting. She looked at that hand, the same hand that had pulled her back from humiliation at the ranch gate, poured her morning coffee, and worked the soil beside her day after day. She placed her own hand in his, feeling the faint warmth it had kept from the instrument. No need to be perfect, he said quietly. Just keep the beat. He lifted the fiddle again, tucking it under his chin, bowing with one hand and guiding her with the other. The first steps were slow and awkward. The porch boards uneven, the space narrow, forcing them to sidestep flower pots and stray boots. She kept her eyes on her boots until Lawson's voice cut in. Look at me. If you keep staring at the ground, you'll miss the sky. She lifted her gaze, and their eyes caught something steady in his look, made her forget to be careful. Her steps found the rhythm. The hem of her dress brushed against his jeans with every turn. The notes weren't flawless. Lawson was half playing, half leading, but the tune stayed warm. No one watched, but the night wind and the lamplight spilling through the window. When the last turn came, he let the fiddle fall silent, but kept hold of her hand a heartbeat longer than the music. Neither spoke, and neither needed to. He stepped back, still holding her hand, and spun her gently. She stumbled, her skirt sweeping across his knee, and let out a laugh, full and unguarded. Trying to make me lose my balance, she teased, cheeks warm. Maybe, he said, voice low with a flicker of mischief. But you stayed on your feet, not because of you, she shot back. Though she didn't pull away, the night breeze slipped through the porch, carrying the scent of dry hay from the barn. The wood under their boots creaked in the same slow rhythm as their steps had moments ago. Neither tried to fill the silence. They just stood there, as if time had slowed enough for them to breathe in the same measure. Genevieve realized her chest felt lighter, not from the dance itself, but because, for a few minutes, she had forgotten to be guarded. Lawson watched her for a long moment, then said quietly, I'm no good at saying what folks expect, but if tonight made you laugh, that's enough for me. The words warmed her more deeply than she cared to admit. When the fiddle was set aside, Lawson sat on the porch steps, hat resting beside him. Genevieve stayed standing a moment, one hand on the porch post, her heart not yet steady. Sit, he said, not as an order, but as an invitation. She settled beside him, close enough to hear his breathing, far enough to keep her comfort. The lamplight cast their shadows long across the damp grass. In the distance, crickets called and water dripped from the gutter in an easy rhythm. Lawson rested the fiddle on his knee, his thumb running over the worn wood. My father taught me that tune, he said, told me. Some songs aren't for performing. They're for keeping. For keeping who? She asked. He looked out over the dark prairie. For those who were here once, but aren't anymore. She didn't press for more. Instead, She found herself saying, "I used to think I'd never make another memory worth keeping." Lawson turned toward her, his gaze steady and certain. "Maybe tonight's a start." She held his look for a moment, then smiled soft, not entirely joyful, but edged with belief. The night air felt gentler, as if the whole prairie was listening. Lawson leaned his elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the horizon's dark line. Genevieve drew her scarf higher around her neck, not against the cold, but to hide the quickness of her pulse. "Tomorrow," Lawson said after a pause, "I've got to ride into town for salt and a new coil of rope." He hesitated, then added, "If you want, we could stop by the fair in the evening. It's not Chicago, but there's music." She studied him. "I thought you didn't like crowds." "I don't," he admitted, "but some places feel different if you're with the right person." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she twisted the stem of the same wild daisy he'd given her days ago and tucked it into a crack in the porch post. "Leave it here," she said, "so I'll remember there was music on this porch tonight." Lawson nodded. They stayed until the oil lamp inside dwindled to a dim halo. When they finally rose, no good nights passed between them. But when the door closed behind her, Genevieve knew one thing. This was the first time in years she would fall asleep with a new memory worth keeping. Part 4. The Shirt and the Confirmation. That evening, the ranch kitchen smelled of fresh-baked bread and pine wood burning in the stove. Genevieve sat at the wooden table, both hands wrapped around a brown oilcloth bundle. The lamp's soft golden light stretched her shadow long across the tabletop. Lawson came in from the porch, removed his hat, and brushed road dust from his shoulders. He started toward the stove, but his eyes caught on what she was holding. "What's that?" he asked, not quite curious, but clearly inviting her to speak. "For you." She slid the bundle toward him. "Been working on it for weeks. Waited until my hands weren't so chapped to hand it over." Lawson pulled out a chair, sat, and unwrapped the bundle with care. Inside lay a hand-sewn shirt indigo cloth, worn but strong, the seams straight and neat, each stitch small and sure. The lamplight glinted on the polished wooden buttons, their grain holding the faint imprint of the maker's hands. "You made this." She nodded. "Found the fabric in my trunk. Thought, if you're riding into town, you ought to have something decent." He was quiet for a long moment, running his fingers along the collar. "I used to have more shirts," he said finally. "But winter after winter, storms, they wore thin." He shook his head, as if the right words wouldn't come. "This is the best I've ever had." Genevieve pressed her lips together, unsure what to say. But when he folded the shirt and set it down with the care of a man handling something valuable, she knew it had been received with both hands and with his whole heart. A stray gust slipped through the kitchen door, making the lamp flame shiver. Genevieve rose to carry the breadboard to the sink. Her voice floated back, hesitant but with a thread of resolve. "What do you think about building another chicken coop?" Lawson looked up from the shirt. "Chicken coop, west side of the apple grove. Grounds flat, close to water." She washed and dried her hands before turning to face him. "I can build part of it myself. Just need you to guide me. I want something that feeds me and contributes to this ranch." He leaned back, eyes steady on her. "You've done more than that since the day you stepped here." "No," her voice firmed. "I don't want folks thinking Lawson Reed brought a woman from Chicago just to take pity on her. I want to belong here because I've earned it." Lawson stood and came around the table. The lamp lit the weathered lines of his face, the look in his eyes deep and calm. He reached up and brushed back a loose strand of hair from her cheek, his fingers grazing skin cool from the evening air. "Genevieve," he said slowly, each word anchored in truth. "Since the first day, you've never been a burden. Not for 1 minute." She stood still, the floorboards beneath her somehow feeling more solid. It wasn't comfort he was offering. It was truth, spoken exactly when she needed it most. He didn't step back, and she didn't either. Her fingers found the table's edge, holding to something tangible while she absorbed the weight in his gaze. "I don't know how long I'll be in Montana," she said quietly, "but I know I don't want to just pass through someone's life and vanish." His reply was steady, without hesitation. "Then don't stay. We'll build the co-op, plant more vegetables, and run this place as if it's been yours from the start." There was nothing flowery in it, no promises of forever. But in the stillness of that kitchen, it rang like a vow. Her throat tightened, not from sentiment alone, but from realizing she trusted him, a man who never asked for her trust, yet somehow had it. She nodded. "Tomorrow." Then a rare smile tugged at his mouth. He reached for the shirt. "And tomorrow, I'll wear this for our first day." In that moment, the kitchen seemed warmer than the fire itself. The open window let in the last of the sunset, laying a honey-colored light across the table and the neatly folded shirt. Genevieve sat again, idly turning a wooden button between her fingers. Lawson stood at the stove, pouring hot water into 2 enamel cups. He set one before her, the scent of mint tea rising into the air. "Man in town sells good laying hens," he said, as if the chicken coop were already part of their plans. "Doesn't cost much, but you have to pick the right breed if you want steady eggs." She smiled. "You talk about chickens like you talk about planting an orchard." "Same thing," he said with a shrug. "Both need patience." Her eyes lingered on him. "And you think I have patience?" He didn't answer right away, just set his work-roughened hand on the table, close enough that hers was only a span away. "I think you've got more than you believe. I've seen it." The words warmed her in a way she hadn't felt in years. Outside, darkness claimed the prairie. But inside the kitchen, the light still held, enough for them to see each other clearly, without needing to explain more. Genevieve rose and took the shirt in both hands. She crossed to him, offering it back. "Tomorrow, when you wear this, it won't just be a shirt. It'll be proof that I've started building my place here." He accepted it, eyes never leaving hers, "And I'll wear it until it's nothing but stitches and memory." They stood in that quiet space a moment longer, close without touching, the kitchen seeming to draw in around them. Then Lawson tucked the shirt into the cabinet where he kept what mattered most. "Tomorrow," he said, "we start the co-op, and after that, plenty more." Genevieve smiled, feeling not just welcome, but woven into the picture they were shaping, together a picture with a roof overhead, the scent of mint tea in the air, wine on the porch, and an indigo shirt hanging in the kitchen. Part 5. The Silent Proposal. That evening, sunset settled slow over the hills, spilling honey gold light across the land and making the ranch porch seem lit from within. Genevieve sat on the second step, holding a cooling cup of tea, her eyes fixed on the trail where the horizon had already swallowed the last of the day. Lawson stepped out from the house, his boots sounding softly against the wood. He didn't sit right away, just leaned against the porch post, following her gaze. The air still carried the scent of warm earth and pine wood smoke from the kitchen stove. "Tomorrow's gonna be a hot one," he said, his low voice breaking the quiet. She nodded faintly, then turned to look at him. "Do you ever think about staying here forever?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped forward and took the top step, close enough that his shadow brushed her shoulder. "If there's someone to stay with, yes." A light breeze stirred the hem of her dress, and in that small shift, Genevieve realized he was carrying something heavier than the word stay. Lawson slid a hand into his shirt pocket, his fingers brushing the edge of a paper worn soft from being folded too long. He looked at her for a moment, measuring the time, then pulled it out and placed it in her palm. The small paper was frayed at the corners, creased from being held and opened again and again. She searched his face, but he only nodded. "Go on." She unfolded it slowly. Black ink letters appeared, few words, but sure and steady, written like the way he spoke. "I want you to have a name in this place, if you want it. Take mine." Genevieve read it once, then again. Her heartbeat rose, not from surprise, but from the way every part of her seemed to settle at once. "When did you write this?" she asked, her voice catching, like she'd just drawn a long breath. "The night you asked me." "What am I to you?" "Huh?" His eyes shifted toward the fading light, then back. "I didn't give it to you then. Didn't want to press you. I kept it waiting until you were ready." She tightened her grip on the paper, feeling the weight of each word, not from the ink, but from the months it had ridden close to his heart. "You're not kneeling?" she asked, the corner of her mouth trembling. "No." His answer was firm. "I don't need ceremony to know I'm sure." The breeze swept a few strands of her hair across her face. Lawson reached out, brushed them back, and let his fingers rest just a fraction longer than before, long enough for her to feel what he hadn't yet said aloud. She looked at the paper again. The words were plain, but carried the warmth of something kept through a long winter. Folding it carefully, she pressed it to her chest. Lawson sat still, as if he could wait another season if needed. But there was a light in his eyes, quiet hope, the kind a man only lets show when he's willing to place his whole life in someone else's hands. She drew in a breath, the taste of cooled tea still in her throat. "Yes," she said softly. Just one word, but enough to turn the wind on the porch, enough to let the last light stain the wood a shade deeper. Lawson didn't kiss her, didn't pull her close. He only nodded, slow and certain, sealing a bargain that had been in place far longer than either had admitted. "Then," he said, "tomorrow we start calling each other by the family name that's ours." Genevieve smiled without holding back. "And build that chicken coop for 2 people, not just one." They both laughed quietly, their voices mingling with the crickets in the field and the cooling air. And she knew this wasn't a proposal. This was an agreement to keep walking the same road they'd started on the day she arrived. After her yes settled into the air, silence wrapped the porch. The last of the sun turned the fields to deep bronze, and the far-off mountains seemed to hold the day's final light in their arms. Leaning against the post, Lawson kept his eyes forward, but shifted his hand until his fingers brushed hers, just a single point of contact. Yet Genevieve felt as if she dropped anchor in solid ground. "I can't promise life here will be easy," he said, voice low enough to almost blend with the wind. "But I won't let you face it alone." She turned toward him, catching the last glint of daylight in his eyes. "Then I won't leave you alone either." No other words were needed. The certainty had always been there tonight. It simply had a name. From below, the ranch's brown cat leapt onto the porch and curled itself between them. Lawson let it rest between his boots, as if placing a small period at the end of their night. Darkness came faster once the sun had dropped. Overhead, the thin crescent moon cast a gentle light over the roof and the worn boards where they sat. Genevieve still held the folded paper, her thumb tracing the crease like she was memorizing both the handwriting and the warmth from his pocket. Lawson kept his gaze on the horizon, glancing at her now and then, just enough to make sure she was still there. The night carried the smell of summer grass and the faint hint of mint from the teapot inside. Everything about it pressed itself into memory, as if the moment wanted to last longer than time would normally allow. When she finally rose, she didn't head straight for the door. She rested her hand lightly on his shoulder, Thank you for not letting me sleep out there. That night, he looked up and nodded once. Thank you for getting in my wagon. No kiss, no embrace, just two people looking at each other a beat longer than needed before stepping inside. The door shut, leaving only moonlight on the porch, where a proposal without flowers had been answered. That summer drifted by in mornings, with coffee on the steps, long hours in the sun, and slow evenings in lamplight. The chicken coop stood firm by the garden. The vegetables grew thick, and in the cupboard, an indigo shirt stayed folded, only worn on days that mattered. Neither of them ever said, "You saved me," or "You changed me." They simply chose every day to walk out onto the same stretch of land, come back to the same porch, and close the space between them with presents. Years later, with their hair turned silver, Genevieve still kept that paper in the kitchen drawer. The ink had faded, the folds had worn, but every word remained. And every morning, Lawson still looked for her before he looked for anything else. They'd learned that happiness doesn't come from someone rescuing you, but from someone choosing to stay every single day. Tell us, do you believe that sometimes you don't need promises, only someone who never leaves? Drop your thoughts in the comments and rate this story from 0 to 10. If your heart has ever found such a harbor, leave the words, "I understand,"